All right, looks like we are live here on Standing for Truth. And I want to welcome everybody. I'm looking at everybody in the chat. Doki Doki. Appreciate it, brother. All of the relevant links. So what we're going to be focusing on is a little bit of end times theology, some comments on comments, and an open mic. For about 90 minutes, I think I'll keep the mic open for anybody who wants to join and also discuss the topic. So what I'm going to do before I bring anybody in is set the foundation for what we are going to discuss. And if people in the audience could give me an audio, video, and connection check, that would be great. I was having some issues right before going live, but I should be fixed now. So, okay. All is good. Appreciate it. Okay, so anybody who wants to join to discuss Daniel's 70th week, specifically the question, who is the he of Daniel 9:27? Now, I did an impromptu discussion just a couple days ago on this question, who is the he of Daniel 9:27, with John Myers. And so I wanted to go through some of these comments, as it's essentially impossible for me to respond to every single comment that comes in, or else that would be a full-time job. But there are some comments here that I feel are important to address. So let me start with Ash Williams. And Ash, you're welcome to join the show as well. I'll say in about 10 minutes, I'll start bringing people in. I do have the link pinned. And so my challenge to anybody joining who would disagree with me on this, I don't want filibustering. I don't necessarily want to hear what you believe on the topic. I want to hear what the evidence is for what you believe. Okay. And so what I mean by that is I specifically want an answer to the challenge that I've put forth now for probably a couple of years dealing with this topic. I want to see contextual, historical, and grammatical justification for making Daniel 9:27 the Messiah, because I've yet to see an answer to this challenge. Nobody in the comment sections are interacting with my points. And this only serves to confirm the strength of my specific eschatological model when it comes to this. Nobody's addressing the historical evidence. Nobody's addressing the evidence from grammar. Nobody's addressing the contextual evidence. And so that's my challenge to anybody who joins and disagrees with what I'm saying. I want to see justification for making the he of Daniel 9:27 Messiah. Okay, so let's go through a couple of these comments and then I'll start bringing people in. Ash Williams, appreciate it. So he posts a comment. I do want to periodically check the chat. Again, the link is pinned for anybody that wants to join on either side for some good discussion. So Ash Williams, Daniel 8:11. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him. So the question is, who's the he here? By him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. He says, still Jesus. They don't need animal sacrifice anymore. If God ends it and they continue, they are wrong / disobeying God. If man ends it, then it is man at fault. Okay, so firstly, real quick, Daniel 8 is not talking about Jesus. It's talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, the little horn that came out of your third empire, the Grecian Empire. Specifically, the Grecian Empire was broken up into 4 kingdoms. Okay, Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, run by Ptolemy. The Seleucid kingdom, which is where Antiochus Epiphanes came out of. And he's the little horn of Daniel 8, the third kingdom. And so by him is referring to Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, I would argue it's ultimately the dragon. It's the devil. It's the prince of darkness, not the prince of peace. He's the one who influences these Antichrist types, these leaders, these wicked leaders. He's the one who gives them power. Daniel tells us that Antiochus Epiphanes has great power, but it's not of his own because it's of the dragon. Revelation 13, speaking about the future, talks about the Antichrist, the beast. He has great power, but he's given power and authority through the dragon. And so this is the prince of darkness. He is the one giving these leaders influence and power to do that which they do. And so in 2nd century BC, Antiochus Epiphanes, through the power and influence of the dragon, he took away the daily sacrifice. So this is not a good person taking away the daily sacrifice. So it's not Jesus, Ash. They don't need animal sacrifice anymore. Well, this was pre-cross, so they were still sacrificing animals in 2nd century BC. Now, Daniel 9:27, I'll go to my slide here. Notice how it says, and he, well, what's the most recent noun? And he's a pronoun. So what does the he go back to? Well, it goes back to the people of the prince. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah, so there's Jesus, he's cut off. This is a prophecy of the substitutionary atonement. Jesus is cut off, not for you or not for himself, but for you, for me, for the world. He was bruised for our iniquities and not for himself and the people of the prince. So Jesus was cut off in probably 33 AD, somewhere between 31 and 33 AD. His ministry was most likely about 3.5 years. And so this tells us after that, a person's going to come, and it's his people that are going to destroy the city and the sanctuary during a war. That's typically what a flood means, right? In the end thereof shall be with a flood. It's a war, an army. And so we know this happened between 66 and 73. 7-year Jewish-Roman war, right in the middle of the war. General Titus and his Roman legion came in. They destroyed the temple. They destroyed the sanctuary. As a result, the animal sacrifices literally stopped. Let me repeat myself. This happened right in the middle of this 7-year Jewish-Roman war. This isn't a coincidence, folks. Right in the middle of the war, the temple's destroyed, the sacrifice literally stops. And this all happened after Jesus was cut off, after he died, was buried, and rose again. And so the he, this pronoun, goes back to the last noun, which is people of the prince. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week, so in the midst of this 7-year Jewish-Roman war, he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation, notice this, to cease. This can't be Jesus because, yes, he took away the sins of the world. He's the lamb slain from the foundation of the world. But Jews still continue to sacrifice animals. The sacrifice did not cease. Those that hold to a preterist interpretation of this will say, well, it's supposed to stop. Well, that's not what it says. You can't just insert, this is eisegesis. You can't just insert that into the text. Well, they were supposed to stop. No, they still sacrificed animals, but the sacrifices literally stopped. They ceased in 70 AD, right in the middle of that war, just as this predicts. In the midst of the week, he, speaking of really the prince of darkness, remember, there's dual and triple prophecy fulfillment, where you've got an immediate fulfillment or a shadow fulfillment, followed by something more dramatic in the end times, the end game fulfillment. And so this is both General Titus and the future Antichrist, but it's basically the prince of darkness. It's the dragon who gives power unto these leaders throughout history. So it's not the prince of peace, it's the prince of darkness. This isn't a good person that's taking away this sacrifice. This happened in 70 AD, right in the middle of the war. The war was 7 years. This jives with history, jives with the grammar. People want to say, well, the people of the prince are the Roman, the Roman legion, and the prince is God. Well, you could not actually say that the Roman legion are the people of God. You could say that they were used as an instrument of God carrying out his judgment and wrath, but you could not say they're the people of God. The people of God are Christian, saved people. And so that doesn't work. History confirms that this prince was General Titus. He came in with his Roman army. He destroyed the city. And so there was a Daniel 70th week from 66 to 73, but this is a shadow for a greater 70th week in the future, seven-year period. We have an analog in Revelation. If there's an analog, you have justification. Revelation talks about 7 years. You see 3.5 years, you see 1,260 days, 1,290 days, 42 months. Antichrist continues in power for 42 months. This isn't a coincidence, guys. If he's continuing in power, he's continuing from something, because that 42 months is the second half of that week. Okay? The context also dictates that this is not Messiah, because as Ash pointed out, Daniel 8, but he's wrong to say that this is Jesus. This goes back to the little horn. If you read through Daniel 8, yea, he, that's referring to the little horn, Antiochus Epiphanes. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host. And by who? By him. Antiochus Epiphanes, or the dragon, the serpent, the daily sacrifice was taken away. He's against the daily sacrifice. He sets up the transgression of desolation. The person who takes away the daily sacrifice is also the person who sets up the transgression of desolation. Daniel 11, Daniel 12, same thing. Daily sacrifice is taken away. Antiochus Epiphanes, or the future Antichrist. Daniel 12, same thing. Daily sacrifice is taken away. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I've already given hours and hours and hours of presentations and lectures on this, and I've debated it a dozen times. But people are not interacting with these points. They're just repeating the same talking points that have already been addressed. They're not actually engaging with the counterpoints to their points. They're not providing a stronger model. They're not answering the contextual, historical, and grammatical arguments. And so as I continue to respond to these comments, let's see who's backstage. Okay, so we got Josh, got my brother Mars Hill. What's going on, gents? Good to have you.
Yeah, what's up?
How you doing, Donny?
Doing good. Doing good. Josh, you've got a debate on this topic coming up, don't you?
Yeah, I think this is, you're more specific in terms of the who is the he in verse 27. I think the debate that we're going to be trying to put together, I think it's confirmed for sure the 22nd already. It is more about whether or not if it's future or if it already happened. It's slightly different, but I think it's kind of like they go hand in hand.
I'd argue it's both, because there was a Daniel 70th week from 66 to 73, 7-year Jewish-Roman war. Right in the middle of that war, General Titus and the Roman legion came in, destroyed the temple. As a result, the sacrifices stopped. Okay.
I have seen that. I've seen John Mayer actually sent me a video showing where they kind of like animate how the Roman Empire came and they circled it, and like kind of their little tactics. They took down one wall at a time, and man, it's pretty messed up because like you think about it, like they leveled the place, like they killed everyone.
Right.
And I can only imagine the people that they didn't kill, they took as slaves.
Well, a lot of people don't. So, for example, here's all the sources. The first Jewish-Roman war, 66 to 73. It's a 7-year Jewish-Roman war. People think that it ended in 70 AD or something like that. No, so 70 AD was the midpoint of it, but it still continued on for another 3.5 years. It's not a coincidence that this war was 7 years, and right in the middle of the war is when the sacrifice stopped. And so the point is, the he of Daniel 9:27, it's not Messiah. It can't be. Context destroys that. History destroys that. Grammar destroys that. people who argue that the he is Antiochus Epiphanes have a better argument than those that argue it's Messiah, because it's Antiochus Epiphanes all throughout Daniel 8, Daniel 11, Daniel 12.
Yeah.
He's a shadow of the future Antichrist, right? We have local fulfillments, and then we have a future more dramatic fulfillment. But notice this in Daniel 8 or Daniel 11. Speaking of Antiochus Epiphanes, but also the future Antichrist. He shall exalteth himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods. 2 Thessalonians 2, speaking of a person after Antiochus Epiphanes, the man of sin, the son of perdition, he does the same thing. He opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God or all that is worshipped, because it's Satan. It's the dragon that is influencing and giving power unto these Antichrist types. And so when you go back to Daniel 9, and it says, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. The antecedent is the people of the prince. That's the prince of darkness. That's Satan. That's not the prince of peace. The prince of peace is up here. This is Messiah. But in the same way that Antiochus Epiphanes took away the daily sacrifice, Titus took away the daily sacrifice, Antiochus Epiphanes set up the transgression of desolation. This is all done through the prince of darkness, and he is going to be working and influencing the beast, the Antichrist in the future. And so ultimately, the he in Daniel 9:27 is the Antichrist, or the prince of darkness who gives power unto the Antichrist. It's not the Messiah. History, grammar, and context destroys that. And so my challenge to anybody, feel free to click the link, join if you disagree with me. I want to see justification through history, context, and grammar that the he here is Messiah. It's so funny because Daniel 8 has somebody bad taking away the daily sacrifice. Daniel 11, somebody bad's taking away the daily sacrifice. Revelation 12, somebody bad's taking away the daily sacrifice. But for Daniel 9, we're just supposed to believe that this is something different, you know? Gentlemen, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, if you see Matthew 24, I think there's another parallel to Daniel. What's the part where he's talking about that in Jerusalem or Israel, that everybody's going to have to flee the city?
Right.
And I think that's another parallel to Daniel. I think it says a very similar thing in Daniel, that they're going to have to flee Israel in those days. So, I mean, that has to be because an Antichrist is, the son of perdition is doing his damage at that point. I never actually heard anybody try to claim that it was Jesus, to be honest, until you mentioned this. That's pretty far-fetched for me to even contemplate that somebody could interpret that.
Right. And we'll go through that in more detail. A lot of people do hold to, a lot of non-premillennial proponents, they'll hold to a preterist interpretation of that. Josh, what are your overall thoughts on Daniel 9:27? Take a couple minutes. I got to run upstairs real quick. And go ahead, brother.
If you are still listening, Donny, by the time you get back, then I'm going to want to get a response from you on this. If you're not, then I'll go ahead and repeat it. So my first question, it revolves with the desolation of Abomination. So I kind of been doing some research, and in my research, I kind of found that I think the king, which you're talking about, that already happened in 67 AD and 73 AD, that somebody actually went into the temple and they sacrificed a pig, and they were forcing the Jews to eat the pig. So that's kind of my first question there, is like, is that something that we can find in scripture that already happened, and is this something that we can find historically that may have happened as well? And then the next question is, unless you want to touch on that first, and then I'll move on to my next point so we don't get too carried away.
Sure. Yeah, it's a good question. There was a transgression of desolation or abomination of desolation in 2nd century BC with Antiochus Epiphanes. He was a shadow of the future Antichrist. He was a 2nd century BC Antichrist. Remember, Antichrist just means in the place of. A lot of people, they erroneously think Antichrist means against Christ. You know, I'm anti-abortion. I'm anti-evolution. I'm anti this, anti that. Biblically, Antichrist actually means in the place of. And Antiochus Epiphanes, they've unearthed gold coins where he's depicted as God manifest. He saw himself as God manifest. Daniel 8 or 11, he's described as exalting himself and magnifying himself above every god. So he's doing what the Antichrist does, because remember, this is the prince of darkness. This is the dragon, ultimately, that gives power and influence to these wicked leaders. And so history confirms that Daniel 8, right here, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him, this is referring to Antiochus Epiphanes, but also there's an application here for the future, because the world works in cycles, God works in prophetic cycles, history repeats itself. And so, yes, there is an abomination of desolation in 2nd century BC. There was a type of abomination of desolation in 1st century AD, in 70 AD. And then there's going to be an abomination of desolation in the future. Revelation 13 describes this image as compared to your first two abominations. This image can speak, and all those who don't worship it will be killed. We understand technology can allow for that today. We have the kind of technology, the sophisticated technology, to allow for an image that can speak. Think about a hologram. I'm an image that's speaking right now, right? I'm not the abomination of desolation, but I'm an image. This kind of technology was not available in 2nd century BC or 1st century AD. And so as it says, and an host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression. Talks about how he takes away the daily sacrifice, sets up the transgression of desolation. Well, history confirms this. So here's a few historical sources. Antiochus Epiphanes, very interesting character. People who go into Daniel but don't know anything about Antiochus Epiphanes, they don't know anything about the Maccabean revolt, they don't know anything about the 2nd century transgression of desolation, they just don't really have a place discussing Daniel, because you have to understand the history as you go into interpreting these texts. And so right here, 2nd century BC, Antiochus marched to Jerusalem. Okay. He erected a statue of Zeus in the temple when he took away the daily sacrifice, and he sacrificed a pig on the altar. And Antiochus Epiphanes, because you get a lot of preterists, they don't understand the history, because they ask the question, well, where does the Antichrist make a covenant? The second they ask that question, I realize you haven't studied this, because Antiochus Epiphanes, who everybody agrees is a shadow of the Antichrist, he's doing this through the power of the prince of darkness. He made a covenant. He made a league with apostate Jews. You can read about this in 1st Maccabees. History confirms this. Notice, this is the apostate Jews saying, let us go and make a covenant with the heathen. This is not a godly covenant. This is apostate, unsaved Jews at that time. They are going to the heathen, specifically Antiochus Epiphanes. They're making a covenant with him. And Daniel 11 actually confirms this, because Daniel 11, I have a slide here. We have Antiochus Epiphanes, he makes a league. It says he makes a league. And so a synonym for league is covenant. To make a covenant is basically to make a league. And so you have Antiochus Epiphanes, who takes away the daily sacrifice. He sets up the transgression of desolation. He makes a league. Everything Antiochus Epiphanes does, the Antichrist is described as doing. Because really, it's the prince of darkness. It's Satan doing these things. And the world works in cycles. Satan tries to conquer in the same way, generation after generation. Daniel 11 right here. And after the league. So when these guys ask, where does Gary DeMar, Where does Antichrist make a league? Where does he make a covenant? Well, right here. After the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully. He comes in peaceably to make a covenant, to make an agreement, establish it, firm handshake on it, okay? And then he goes against it. He works deceitfully. Comes in peaceably, but he works deceitfully. Exactly what the Antichrist does. Right here, covenant. And go ahead, brother. What are your thoughts on that?
So my general understanding of this covenant has been that it's a covenant of peace, which as we see in Daniel 11:24, it says that he shall enter peaceably. So it seems like that is like the initial like image he's trying to portray. Like, look, I can be trusted. Like I'm gonna bring about peace. So if we just stop there, I'm not saying I'm stopping there, but if you were simply to stop there and not use the rest of the context, try to piece it together, then I can see how someone, and I'm kind of playing devil's advocate here, can kind of see how someone would take Daniel 9:26, where it says 62 weeks Messiah should be cut off, and after him, and the people of the prince, right? So we can establish for sure that there's a prince and he has people, right? And then we can also deduce from verse 26 on chapter 11 that verse 24, that he shall enter peacefully. So if you just stop there and you don't go any further, and you try to look at Isaiah 9:6, and what does Isaiah 9:6 says? And unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, right? So we can agree that that's Jesus in Isaiah, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father. And for anyone who doubts the Trinity and needed evidence, well, there you have it. He's also the Father, he's also the Son. And then at the end, it says the Prince of Peace, right? So if you were simply to kind of try to piece all of that together, I can see how somebody might deceitfully try to say that the he shall confirm a covenant, and a covenant which will seem as a covenant of peace. And in that instance, before he reveals his true intentions, it would seem as if he is the prince.
And let me stop you there. This is why history is so important. This is why context is so important. Firstly, I do want to thank Finding the Narrative. Appreciate the support and also the comment. So history has confirmed that Antiochus Epiphanes, you can read all about this in history textbooks. You can read about it in First Maccabees. He's well known as being a leader, a conqueror, who would make deals. He'd come in peaceably, but then he'd work behind the scenes deceitfully, get what he wants, and then he would basically go against the people that he made the agreement with. And Revelation or Daniel 11 confirms this. It literally says he makes a league, he comes in peaceably, but he works deceitfully. So for those to say, well, because it's a covenant, it must be Jesus, because Jesus is the Prince of Peace, and then using those other verses that you're talking about, again, it ignores the history, ignores the grammar, ignores the context. And that's my challenge to anybody in the chat who disagrees with what I'm saying. Let's go. It's about time that the critics on this issue interact with the counterpoints to their talking points. I have yet to see a single comment that actually interacts with the history, the grammar, and the context. No one's interacting with it. And it tells me that their position is weak because of it. Don't get me wrong, it's secondary, it's non-essential, but truth is important. And if they have a model, they need to back it up. Where's Jamie Russell? Where's Chris Lucas? Let's go. Let's see counters to these points. So anyways, Josh, my brother, go ahead.
I was just going to say your Canadian came out a little bit with the bout right there. But
how about that?
Yeah, how about that? Or what is it? Is it wagon or how do you? Anyways, that's besides the point. So yeah, so like you see, I can see how somebody will try to kind of like twist the scripture to meet their, false, understanding. The only other question I would bring to you, um, would be, it seems like for the most part, week 1 through 69 are pretty much like happening within a couple hundred years of each other, kind of like back to back. And you know we do have history which shows us that there's these type of people that operate with that kind of Trojan horse mentality. They kind of send in a gift, and then in reality, it's not a gift. It's, they're trying to weasel their way in there. But how do we explain like the almost 2,000 year gap in the time frame from the last time that there was the temple was defiled, and they seized the sacrifice, until now? Like, is there anything to kind of indicate to us that there's
Yeah.
that we'd have to wait a long time before we are revealed that he or the Antichrist comes back? Like,
Well, see, the thing is, there's many antichrists. Remember, Antichrist shall come, but there's been many antichrists. I do hear some background noise, so maybe if people could get in the habit, if they're not talking, just make sure to mute yourself, just to reduce background noise. And so there are many antichrists, but there will be one main antichrist in the end game, because there's been
so
a
that's
lot
my
of
question.
appetizers. So my point is, we didn't really have to wait that long. And let me explain why. So Daniel 9, we have 70 weeks. God broke up these weeks into 3 components or elements for us. We didn't do this. God did it. He says, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah, the Prince, shall be 7 weeks. So there's one component. And 62 weeks, 62 weeks. So there's component 2. The street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. So you're counting basically 1 week, 2 weeks, 7 weeks. Oh, you're done component 1. Then you've got 10 weeks, 12 weeks, 62 weeks. Oh, you're done component 2. So you're counting up to 69 weeks. Component 1, boom. Component 2, Messiah is cut off. So you can't even put Messiah into that final week because he's cut off before the final week begins. Now, the greater point I'm trying to make is there's 2 gaps. A lot of people miss this. You have 7 weeks, a gap, because you have that component, 7 weeks. Then there has to be a gap, or else this would be a self-fulfilled prophecy. There's a gap. We don't really know how many years that gap is, but this is God's way of ensuring that people can't just calculate an exact date to when Messiah is going to be cut off, okay? So you got 7 weeks, a gap, 62 weeks, a gap, and then you got your final week. And we know this even in terms of the shadow fulfillment, because Messiah is cut off in 33 AD. Then we have a gap from 33 to 66 AD when the 7-year Jewish-Roman War starts. So there's a gap there. That's the shadow fulfillment. So it makes sense that your more literal and dramatic fulfillment also has a gap. That gap just happens to be a couple thousand years, but it's a gap nonetheless. So we see a gap in terms of the shadow fulfillment. And by necessity, there's also a gap in terms of the more dramatic fulfillment in the end times. Does that make sense, Josh?
Yeah, and this is kind of going to be my last question here, and then we'll let Praise and Predators kind of like give their 2 cents.
Sure.
I'm in here for now. So would you say that from what was it, 73 AD when we would say that the last 7-year kind of period happened until now, would we be able to find other examples of other leaders from 73 AD until now that have also done similar things in terms of making these peaceful covenants with many, and then that being deceitful, where a sacrifice was made to cease? Will we see other examples from then until now, or is the Antiochus Epiphany, or how you say his name, would he be the last example that we can kind of like verse for verse like confirm that he's the only one that's done it so far?
Well, scripturally, we know Antiochus Epiphanes for sure because he's mentioned. He's the 2nd century BC Antichrist. He's in the place of Christ. He claimed to be God. He claimed to be God manifest. He took away the daily sacrifice. He set up the transgression of desolation. He made a covenant. He did everything the Antichrist does because remember, again, it's the prince of darkness that's ultimately behind all of this. He's the one that's doing this. So the he and the people of the prince, if anything, that's the prince of darkness and his people. At that time, the Roman legion destroying the temple, destroying the city. Now, throughout history, sure, we can make guesses, right? Nero, probably a type of Antichrist. Throughout the Dark Ages, the Pope was very powerful, probably a type of Antichrist. You know, you could say Stalin was a type of Antichrist, but there we're just kind of guessing. Scripturally, we know for sure that Antiochus Epiphanes was a 2nd century BC Antichrist. And then we also know that there's going to be a future Antichrist because we read about that in Revelation 13. We read about that in 2 Thessalonians 2. Paul says Antichrist is coming, but even now there's many Antichrists. So we know there's one main Antichrist. Josh, does that help, brother?
Yeah, and I think the only difference would be like even if we try to make all these like try to fit the puzzle piece where it probably doesn't belong, I think it's pretty obvious that after 73 AD, the Jewish nation was pretty much scattered and disassembled. Like there hasn't really been a Jewish nation up until what was it, 1950s? That's more recent. So, you know, that just kind of, you know, leads to the idea that it's something that is still it still can happen again because it's the structure is being set up. You know, they have the red heifers in Jerusalem now, and you know they're trying to figure out how to establish a temple. So pretty soon, like the stars are aligning for this greater Antichrist to come in and try to like re-fulfill that prophecy again. But yeah,
well, remember Ecclesiastes. There's no new thing under the sun. The thing that hath been, or the thing that's already happened, Antiochus Epiphanes, abomination of desolation, it is that which shall be. So we should expect it again. And that which is done, things that have already happened, is that which shall be done. And so we see a lot of appetizers throughout history. Scripture describes a lot of these appetizers, like with Antiochus Epiphanes, the Maccabean revolt, everything that occurred there. And it also describes the same events happening in the future. And we can see with everything going on in the Middle East, we can see everything is moving or shifting towards the same events taking place that took place in 70 AD. There's going to be a new temple.
And I was not sure if you saw the comment. If you saw the comment by of the board, you could probably highlight that one. You know, talking in the comments, but not coming in here to try to prove his point. He's trying to claim that Antiochus doesn't fit that.
Right. Well, you know, you'd be hard pressed to argue against Antiochus because Antiochus Epiphanes literally did all the things that Daniel 8 and Daniel 11 describe, and did all the things that Revelation 13 and 2 Thessalonians 2 describe, except this is after Antiochus Epiphanes, because again, it's through the dragon. It's the prince of darkness that's ultimately doing these things, carrying out these things. Okay. And so, but I really do, and I appreciate, so we got Professing Preterist, my good man. Good to have you. We've got Praise. I think someone just left us, Mars Hill. And let me just see. Is there another prophecy in the Bible that has had a triple fulfillment? Well, I would say Antiochus Epiphanes with the Antichrist, abomination of desolation. There's lots of dual prophecy fulfillments that, you know, we could talk about for sure. Maybe we'll go through a few examples later. But okay, Professing Preterist, good to have you. Praise, good to have you. What I really want to focus on for the time that we have here is specifically the he of Daniel 9:27. And to get your thoughts, gentlemen, let me point back to this comparison of Daniel 8 and Daniel 9. God expects us to have read the context, Daniel 7, Daniel 8, Daniel 11, Daniel 12, as we interpret these scriptures. So what's the justification of making the he of Daniel 9:27? Here's the question. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. In the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. Daniel 8, right before Daniel 9. We already know, based on the context, that this isn't somebody good. So it's certainly not the Messiah that's taking away the daily sacrifice. It's somebody bad. Again, I would argue it's the dragon. It's the prince of darkness. But in 2nd century BC, it is... Who's the dragon using? Antiochus Epiphanes. By him, the daily sacrifice was taken away. He's against the daily sacrifice. He's the one that takes it away. He's the one that sets up the transgression of desolation. So why should we interpret Daniel 9 any differently? That's why I think the liberal scholars actually have a stronger model than a lot of your partial preterists or preterists that want to say this is Messiah. Because from my understanding, a lot of liberal scholars, they'll say, no, this is Antiochus Epiphanes, because that's what Daniel 8 is describing. That's what Daniel 11 is describing. That's what Daniel 12 is describing. And so Daniel 9:27 must also be Antiochus Epiphanes. I disagree with that, because I believe Daniel 9 is even more future after Antiochus Epiphanes. But you can say that it's the prince of darkness. It's the prince of darkness all the way through, but he is using Antiochus Epiphanes in 2nd century BC. In 1st century AD, he's using Titus. And in the future, he's using the future Antichrist. So who you do see is the prince of darkness all the way through, but the person that's being used by Satan is different. So I wouldn't say that Daniel 9:27 is Antiochus Epiphanes, but my point is liberal scholars that argue it is, I think they have a better argument in case to make than those that want to interpret this as Messiah. So anyways, I said a lot there. That's my basic question. Gentlemen, great to have you. Go ahead.
It's all old news, 70 AD. What's up, professing preterist? What's up, my guy? So tell us how that he is not the Antichrist. Like, maybe you would say it's a type of Antichrist, but tell us how it's not a future Antichrist.
I'm sorry, was that directed towards me?
How many professing preterists are in the room?
Praise, I thought you were a newly professing preterist. So yeah, Praise, you basically agree with me. So you know what? Professing preterist, take it away, my brother. The question is directed at you. What are your thoughts, my man? Speak to this. And good to see you, by the way.
Yeah, it's good to see you too, man. It's good to see you. Good to be here. God bless and grace and peace to everybody. So yeah, when we look at Daniel 9:27, obviously there is a he that confirms a covenant with many, right? Bringing an end to the sacrifice is much different from the taking away of sacrifice. This is expounded upon by Paul in Hebrews when he talks about Christ being the final sacrifice. Hebrews 10. Obviously, he makes a distinction between the sacrifices that were going on, right? And he even says, for the worshipers would have been cleansed once and for all and would no longer have felt the guilt of their sins. But Christ is the one that puts an end to it, right? So he's hearkening back to Daniel 9:27 by saying this was brought to an end, much different from something being taken away. Obviously, we still had the animalistic sacrifice system going on after Christ's death from the old covenantal Israelites. And that was disrupted. You're right. In AD 60, what is it, 66 to 70, with of course the eventual destruction of the temple and then the city. But I always go back to the original Hebraic text that we have for Daniel 9:27, and it says, "And on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate." So there is a clear distinction between the he that confirms a covenant and the one who makes desolate. So that's my position on it. The Hebraic text is very clear and decisive on that. Obviously, we know that God is it's speaking in parallels pretty much. Daniel 9:26 and 27 are, if you read it, like each description is talking about Christ, then talking about the abominations, the end of the war, talking about the one who makes desolate, which was obviously Titus by way of the Roman army in AD 67 to 70 or 66 to 70.
Okay, so I wrote down a couple of your points. You're making a distinction between putting away and taking away. You're saying that the putting away would be with Titus, basically putting that away, but not completely taking it away. You're saying the taking away, the sacrifice ceasing, would have to be Jesus, Messiah.
Correct. Yes. Again, the word that's used there is the Hebraic word. Basically, it's Shabbath, right? But it's yasbit is a derivative of that, and that word means to cease something. So we know that by all means and technicalities, for sin atonement, there was no longer a need for animal sacrifice after Christ's death. That was the ceasing of it. But if you look at when the sacrifice is taken away, that's much different from something ceasing. It's just saying that something is like disrupted. Doesn't mean that it was necessarily never going to happen again. But we do see, coincidentally enough, in AD 70 with the destruction of the temple, you never see ritual animal sacrifice again. And even if there were to be ritual animal sacrifice reinstituted, let's say like in some hypothetical third temple or whatever, God makes it very clear in Isaiah 66 that whoever slaughters an ox is like one who slays a man. Whoever sacrifices a lamb is like one who breaks a dog's neck. Whoever presents a grain offering is like one who offers pig's blood. Whoever offers frankincense is like one who blesses an idol. So God makes it very clear, and this is about the new heavens and new earth, right? Hey, don't, like, this kind of stuff means nothing. So even if it were to be reinstituted, it would mean nothing to God. It would be an abomination and an abhorrence to God.
Right. So couple points, and I appreciate that. I would strongly disagree, of course, no surprise to you there. I think when it comes to the putting away and the ceasing, I think trying to make that distinction seems to be a little forced, and I do believe that it still ignores the history, the grammar, and the context. The context we've already shown, and for the audience sake, I've put these side by side. Daniel 8, Daniel 11, Daniel 12. There's somebody who's taking away the daily sacrifice. Actually, we see the third person plural pronoun in Daniel 11. So it's even more specific, because it's not like you've got this man, Antiochus Epiphanes, or in the future Antichrist, who's just the Hulk and he's just putting out this massive image himself. No, he's using his people to do it, right? So it's even more specific. It says they, third person plural pronoun. They shall make the abomination that make it desolate place. So whoever takes away the daily sacrifice also puts up this image. Daniel 12, same thing. The daily sacrifice is taken away, the abomination that make it desolate set up. Daniel 8 is especially clear. By him, well, certainly not Messiah, by the prince of darkness, by the dragon, Antiochus Epiphanes specifically here. He's the one that takes away the daily sacrifice. He's the one that sets up the transgression of desolation. Daniel 9 is right in the middle of all that. 7, 8, 11, 12. It's somebody bad doing this. I see no justification still by anybody to say that he in Daniel 9:27, who's taking away the daily sacrifice and then committing this abomination of desolation, is somebody good. Well, we've already seen Daniel 8, Daniel 11, Daniel 12. It's somebody bad. Okay. Now, Jesus Christ is the lamb slain from the foundation of the world. Animal sacrifices were always temporal. They never actually saved. Salvation's always been by faith alone. Abraham believed, it was counted unto him for righteousness. So animal sacrifices were basically just a shadow or a picture of things to come. A picture of the Lamb. God manifest in the flesh, came into this world, had his ministry, performed miracles, died, was buried, rose again. And to all who believe in him, their sins are forgiven, past, present, and future. In the Old Testament, they looked to the cross. People who trusted in the seed of the woman that would come and bruise the head of Satan, the serpent, they may not have known the name of that seed, but those that had trust in that seed, the coming seed, we're saved. It's always been by faith and trust. So animal sacrifices were always temporal anyways. They never actually saved positionally. They never actually took away sins past, present, and future positionally. They were always temporal. We're dealing with earthly salvation, not positional salvation, okay? So it's always been like that. Old Testament, New Testament, and today. So where it says, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. So whoever this he is, he did something that put an abrupt stop to the animal sacrifices. As even if somebody wanted to perform an animal sacrifice, they couldn't. Because this man does something that stops it. Just like in 2nd century BC, Antiochus Epiphanes, he stopped the daily sacrifice. He sacrificed a pig on the altar. He set up a statue of Zeus. Jews at that time, even if they wanted to sacrifice an animal, they couldn't. Just like in 1st century AD, when General Titus came in with the Roman legion, destroyed the city, destroyed the temple, that put an abrupt stop to the daily sacrifice. As in, they couldn't do it even if they wanted to. Jesus Christ, when he died, was buried, and rose again, he stopped the need for animal sacrifices for our temporal sins, as people were doing, to keep in right standing with God. But they were still sacrificing animals. It didn't put this abrupt stop to it on this earth. Jews still did it. But 70 AD, with General Titus, this is what literally put a stop to the daily sacrifices. And my explanation doesn't require any mega stretches. It's confirmed by history. It's confirmed through the grammar, going back to the people of the prince. But most importantly, the context. Daniel 8, Daniel 11, Daniel 12. It's always somebody other than Messiah that is... See, I feel like the partial preterists or the preterists, they're looking at this positionally. No, we're looking at this from the earthly perspective. It's a man who is going in with his people, destroying the temple, destroying the sanctuary. And as a result, since the temple is destroyed, there's no more animal sacrifices. They literally stop. But they did not literally stop in 33 AD when Jesus ascended, the ascension. Anyways, okay. I said a lot there. Go ahead.
No, you're good. So I want to just quote directly from Hebrews 10, verse 2, okay, in reference to, and you're right, like you said there were a shadow of things to come. Verse 1 says that, for the law is only a shadow of the good things about to be. It's melanton, which melo means imminence. It's about to happen, but either way. Verse 2, though, if it could, would not the offerings have ceased? So the inspired author, Paul, is using the same word of ceasing offerings that's used in Daniel 9:27. Then when we look at verse 10, he says, and by that will, we have been sanctified through the sacrifice of the body of Christ once for all. So Paul is now affirming that the offerings did cease by all means and implications for the sanctificational purposes that the sacrifices were for. Again, I agreed with you, and I stated it before. Of course, there were still animal sacrifices happening after Christ's death, but that's because Israel was still underneath the Mosaic covenantal system of worship. They had to follow that system of worship. Galatians 4 makes it abundantly clear that Paul says the present day Jerusalem is Hagar, the one that is giving birth to the children of bondage. They are in slavery in the present day Jerusalem. Our mother is the heavenly one, right? So heavenly Jerusalem, for freedom, Christ freed them. They were under the bondage of the law. They were freed when heavenly Jerusalem came down, which is the destruction of the temple in AD 70. So I get what you're saying, because you're right. Daniel 9, Daniel 10, Daniel 11 are talking about this disruption of the daily sacrifice. But what you're not addressing, and I'm not saying you're doing it on purpose, is that Daniel 9 specifically, though, is much different. The context of it does include the abominations of desolations, right? And part of that was the daily sacrifice being taken away, right? Being disrupted. But when we look at Daniel, the reason why it also includes Christ's sacrifice and the ceasing of oblation and animal sacrifice is because he says that, in verse 24, Daniel 9:24, 70 weeks are decreed for your people and your holy city to stop their transgression, to put an end to sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophet, and to anoint the most holy place. So the reason why you're right. The chapter before and the two chapters after are not bringing Christ's atonement, right, death into it, but it's because they're magnified a little bit more. Daniel 9 is not as magnified. It's a much greater scope of what the purpose of God's appointed time was. And so if we know that Daniel is a Jew, right? He is his people are Jews. Their holy city was Jerusalem. They had transgression. It was the bloodline Israelites that were putting transgression towards God. They had to put an end to sin. They had to make an atonement for iniquity. They had to bring in an everlasting righteousness. They had to seal up the vision and prophet and anointing the most holy place, because there would be a new most holy place. That's part of the priestly duties. They had to anoint the holy place. When the temple was originally built, in the tabernacle, when Solomon's temple was built, when the second temple was built, now you needed to anoint your third temple, right? And that would be the heavenly Jerusalem. So that's why I'm not trying to constrain it to be like, hey, we're going to just go all over the road on Daniel 9. But Daniel 9 is clear of why Christ's death, burial, and resurrection is included in this, because that was all part of putting an end to, atonement for iniquity and bringing in you know what I mean? Like, it all just follows suit. So.
Okay, fair points. A lot there. I'll try and deal with it all. And then maybe we can hone in on 1 or 2 points, go back and forth that way. So yes, I agree. The 70 weeks, they will accomplish these things: making an end to sins, finishing the transgression, anointing the most holy, seal up the vision and prophecy, right? Tying up any loose ends of prophecy, bring in everlasting righteousness. So for these to be accomplished, there's many things that need to take place. And that includes what? Well, go down to verse 26. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. There's the substitutionary atonement. This is what saves us. The fact that Jesus is God manifest in the flesh. He died, he was buried, he rose again, he ascended up into heaven, he's seated at the right hand of the Father, so on and so forth. Okay. And so when we have faith and trust in him, we're saved. And as a result, we have everlasting life. We shall not come into condemnation. Our sins, making an end of sins, our sins, past, present, and future, are forgiven. This is all spiritual, though, because me as a premillennialist, though I know you're a full preterist, you'll differ on this. We will get the salvation of our bodies is future. We are saved, right? Because we're justified, we're regenerated, we're being saved, we're being conformed to the image of his son. That's sanctification. That sanctification process will eventually reach what's called final sanctification or glorification. That's when we get our new bodies. So that part is future. That's when we will literally not sin again. I sin today. You sin today. We all sin today as believers because we still have the flesh. We have the unsaved flesh and the saved spirit. The part of us that's born of God, the born of God inner man, the new man, he doesn't sin, but our flesh sins. So in the future, we're going to get a new body, the redemption of our bodies. And so these were all spiritually fulfilled in 1st century AD. But they will be fulfilled in the ultimate sense at the millennial reign. And so that's why these things do have to take place in order to bring in the millennial kingdom, the 1,000-year reign where Jesus will literally be anointed, just like kings, prophets, and priests were. He has a triple anointing. Jesus is king, prophet, and priest. Yeah, you could say he was anointed at his baptism with the Holy Spirit. Okay, there's an immediate fulfillment or a shadow fulfillment. But in the future, when he's literally on this earth, ruling and reigning physically with his saints who are in glorified bodies who literally won't sin, That'll be the fulfillment of this, because literally there'll be an end to sins, because we as believers won't sin again, because we'll be in a glorified state. This will be the beginning of the everlasting kingdom. Yeah, there's going to be a transition. After the 1,000 years, he's going to hand it to the Father, and then we're going to go into the new heaven and new earth. But that's just a transitionary phase within the everlasting kingdom. Okay, so yes, these were all fulfilled spiritually in 1st century AD, and they will be fulfilled to the uttermost. They'll be fulfilled ultimately in the future, in the same way that we are saved now, we will be saved in the future, the salvation of our bodies. Jesus is ruling and reigning right now in the hearts of believers. He's seated at the right hand of the Father, but he will rule and reign physically on this earth in the future. So yeah, he's already ruling. He has all the power in heaven and in earth, but he's not fully exercising that power. But he will in the future. And to accomplish these things, yes, Jesus had to die. He had to rise again. He had to ascend. But also what? What happens after that? Well, the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Who did that? We understand from history that it was General Titus. First Jewish-Roman War, 7 years. You see, it's not a coincidence that this was 7 years. Instead of going on for too long, just have more of a discussion. I'll stop there and ask you, professing preterist, how do you fit the 7-year Jewish-Roman War in your eschatology? Okay, because what I mean by that is the way that I view this, which I think is the correct way. We have General Titus and the Roman legion, the people of the prince. Again, ultimately, I would argue this is the prince of darkness. You said, well, the context is different from Daniel 8. Yeah, because Daniel 8 and Daniel 11 are describing, in terms of the local or immediate fulfillment, Antiochus Epiphanes. So there are differences, but also a lot of the things are the same, because he's also taking away the daily sacrifice. He also made a covenant. He's doing a lot of the same things, although it's a different context in terms of the historical occurrence when this happened. Okay. Now this is describing a time after Antiochus Epiphanes. It's describing when Messiah is cut off in 1st century AD. And then you have a gap from 33 to 66, the start of that war. And so, yeah, the context is different historically, but a lot of the same things are happening. The prince of darkness is still working through a man, in this case, Titus. The daily sacrifice is taken away. God is using the Roman legion as an instrument. And then I would argue this is a shadow fulfillment of things to come, because the ultimate fulfillment is the millennial reign. These things are determined. These things have to take place to bring in the millennial reign, to literally anoint Jesus Christ, the most holy. So right here, yeah, the context historically is different, but a lot of the same things are happening. Same thing with the future, when it's the prince of darkness, again, being the he here, but this time he's going to be giving influence and power to the man of sin, who's somebody different than Titus, and also somebody different from Antiochus Epiphanes. But it's always the prince of darkness. It's always the serpent, okay? So, he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. These are weeks of years, 7 years. The Jewish-Roman War was 7 years. In the midst of the week, so in the midst of the 7-year period, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate. Yeah, the sanctuary, the city, the temple, it was all destroyed. It was made desolate. Okay, I don't think there is an image set up in 70 AD, because not everything here has to be fulfilled to a T, because it's just a shadow fulfillment. But I find it very curious that people ignore the fact that history has confirmed that this war here, which happened after Messiah was cut off in 33 AD, it was 7 years, right in the middle of the war. I mean, is this all a coincidence? Right in the middle of the war. Look at this, 70 AD. That's 3.5 years into this war. So right in the middle of the week, Titus and his Roman legions. It's even worded the same. The people of the prince. The prince is Titus. The people are the Roman legions. They're not the people of God. They breached the city's middle wall, the decisive event of the first Jewish-Roman war. You can read all about this Jewish-Roman war and everything that took place. You know, there was some horrible things taking place. And so they destroyed the temple, destroyed the city. As a result, the sacrifices literally stopped. They ceased. And so for me, this is simple. This is a Daniel 70th week, a localized fulfillment from 66 to 73. But with a shadow, there's something more dramatic in the end times, the end game, where the Prince of Darkness will be working again, but this time through another man, the Antichrist. So my basic question, Professing Preterist, how do you view the 7-year Jewish-Roman War? Do you see that in here? Do you understand that as being described in Daniel 9, or do you just see it as a coincidence that it was 7 years? Go ahead, take your time.
Yeah, no, you're good. Well, I did want to bring up one thing that you had said earlier. You were like, that you sin and I sin. Hey, man, I regret that. Okay, I'm perfect. No,
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. But so when it comes to, let me just ask you one question, because I'm gonna respond thoroughly to what you said. Do you agree with what I said about Hebrews 10?
That Jesus took away the need for animal sacrifices?
That he was the one that caused them to cease, the offerings to cease?
Well, it's through his death, burial, and resurrection that the necessity of those sacrifices ceased. Yeah, just like in Genesis,
Okay.
when Abraham was sacrificing his son Isaac on the altar, God made it clear that he's going to provide himself a lamb. Okay, speaking of Jesus and himself, because Jesus is God, but in the immediate sense, it was a ram, because Jesus had not yet come. They were still doing, animal sacrifices, but in the future, it was the lamb. So basically, positionally, it's always been Jesus. He was slain from the foundation of the world. So we were always saved by simply looking to him, putting our trust in him. It's not like, well, now we can finally be saved positionally now that Jesus died, was buried, and rose again. I mean, we could always be saved. But from this temporal vantage point, animal sacrifices were used for sanctification, for earthly salvation, for the temporal forgiveness of our sins, right? But they never actually saved us positionally. It was still always through faith and trust in God. So yeah, Jesus had to die. He was buried. He had to rise again. He ascended to the Father. That was necessary to stop the need for animal sacrifices altogether, even for temporal sins. I hope that answers your question.
I mean, yeah, I would argue that the cross changed everything about everything. You know what I mean? That's kind of my view on it. It's a very
It did. It did. But would you agree it still was important in the Old Testament? Before the cross, people were saved by basically looking to the cross, but they didn't know the name of the Savior.
Right.
Today we know the name of it. So it's not, people have always been saved, and it's always been through Jesus Christ, even though in the Old Testament they didn't really know the name of Jesus nor the exact means.
Yeah, well, like how he operated,
right. But in that time, when he came into time and he rose, at that moment, animal sacrifices were completely done away with. Now, they still did them, but they shouldn't have. It's wicked. It wasn't doing anything. It wasn't helping with sanctification. It wasn't taking away their sins temporally. It wasn't helping with fellowship, right? That which the animal sacrifices were good for in the Old Testament, it was done away with at the cross, because the cross changed everything, like you said.
Yeah, cool. So I wanted to touch on your point of Daniel 8, and I think we've had this discussion before, but so here's what confuses me about Daniel 8. So in verse 17, it's talking Christ, right?
Hey, take your time. I'm still listening. I just have to go to the corner here real quick. Take your time.
No,
you got a lot to say. I know.
Yeah, it's all good. So in verse 17 it says, as he came near to where I stood, I was terrified and fell face down. So I guess this is Gabriel, right? Like an archangel, being told by Christ to explain the vision to Daniel. So he says, Son of man, he said to me, understand that the vision concerns the time of the end. So my question to you on that regard is, do you agree that Daniel 8 is in regards to the time of the end? And what is your opinion or your purview on what the time of the end entails? Like what is that time? and if you're still busy, I'll just also ask this. So I know that Antiochus Epiphanes came out of one of the, I think there was like 4 main kingdoms that came from Alexander the Great's death. Technically, there were a couple more. Rome rose from one of the ones that was, back in obviously, Europe. But when we look at where Antiochus Epiphanes' kingdom was, he was in the southeastern corner of like Persia, almost like it bordered like India. Okay. But in Daniel 8, verse 9, it says that, and out of one of them came a horn, a little horn, which grew great exceedingly, toward the south, even toward the east, even toward the glorious land. So when I'm looking at where Antiochus Epiphanes appears on a map, if he's already southeast of Jerusalem, right? Because Israel would be like roughly over here, and it's kind of hard. You'd have to look at a map, but you can find maps online. How is it that him growing south and then east brings him toward the glorious land, which obviously is Israel? I don't think that's possible. That's why I think that this horn that it's talking about is actually the Roman Empire, because the Roman Empire started northeast of, or I'm sorry, northwest of where Jerusalem is or Israel is. So when it started growing, it grew southeast, and that's verified by history. They started going, across Europe, Asia Minor, whatever that would have been called at the time. They even went in ships across to Africa. That's how they took over Egypt, and it grew toward the glorious land. So I still, like, those two things make me kind of question, is this really even pointing towards Antiochus Epiphanes? Is Antiochus Epiphanes even an anti-type or a
Well, let me stop you there, because
Yep.
I got your question from earlier.
Oh.
This point, I've watched a lecture, I've watched a sermon. I'll have to do a video on it in detail, but the way that the globe works, right? The Earth's not flat. I think you agree with me there. The way that the globe works and the way that you would have to travel, and you could even work out the coordinates here. You could start in somewhere in the States, Phoenix, Arizona or something, and go these same directions. It is describing correctly Antiochus Epiphanes, but there's a certain coordinates. It's a complicated issue. Okay. I should do a video on that, but if you actually look at it from a globe perspective and the way that you'd have to travel around certain areas, it would still fit Antiochus Epiphanes. That has been dealt with, but I don't have any slides on it or anything like that. So
Gotcha.
For now, we can put a pin in that point, but I do appreciate it. So with your first question,
yes,
maybe we should go through this just a little bit. Okay, so Antiochus Epiphanes, I don't see how it cannot be Antiochus Epiphanes, because he's the one, as you know, I think we've discussed this before. You have your third kingdom, which is Grecia. Alexander the Great, he was a great conqueror. He conquered with great speed, and he died prematurely. There was no immediate successor for Alexander the Great. And so when he died prematurely, they split the kingdom,
right,
the Grecian Empire, up into 4 kingdoms. Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, Seleucid kingdom or empire, that's where Antiochus Epiphanes came out of. And this describes this little horn coming out of there. And so we know that was Antiochus Epiphanes. And so when it says, yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him, even for sake of argument, let's say you didn't want to say that was Antiochus Epiphanes, you would agree that this is somebody bad. It's not Messiah.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
And that's the most important point I want people to take from what I'm arguing here, is that I thought someone else joined. Just to let anybody in the chat that wants to join, the link is pinned. So Daniel 8, 11, and Revelation 13, they describe the beast, these little horns, these leaders, these bad leaders, they have great power, but it's not of themselves. And I know you have a bit of a different view of Satan than I would, but I would argue that it's the prince of darkness, it's the dragon, the serpent, that's actually working through these men to accomplish what he wants to accomplish, right? And he's failed all throughout history. The world's worked in cycles. He fails in cycles. So in the end time is going to be the end game. This is his Thanos end game, like the Avengers. The Avengers. This is his final fight against God and his people, okay? And so Antiochus Epiphanes, who I believe this is talking about, but if someone would argue it's somebody different, I'd still argue that it's the prince of darkness ultimately that's influencing this man, who's giving power to this man, because this man is literally claiming to be God. He's speaking marvelous things against the God of gods. It just fits Antiochus Epiphanes, though, with history. I mean, as you know, I've gone through my entire presentation on it with all of the historical documentation of Antiochus Epiphanes claiming to be God. They unearthed these gold coins of Antiochus Epiphanes. He's depicted as God. He took away the daily sacrifice. He erected an image of Zeus. The book of Maccabees talks about Antiochus Epiphanes making a covenant with apostate Jews. And then Daniel 11 describes Antiochus Epiphanes as making a league. So it's the same thing. And it talks about him killing the prince of the covenant. History has confirmed this as well. I've got a slide on that. Here's first Maccabees. And there came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes. So I think when the evidence is weighed, I think it's pretty strongly indicating that it's Antiochus Epiphanes. But your question was a good question about the time of the end. Can you reiterate that? And I'll pull up Daniel 8. Which verse are you referring to in Daniel 8, my man?
Yeah, so if you do like verse 16 and 17 kind of congruently, so we've got, and I heard the voice of a man calling from between the banks of the Ulai. Gabriel explained the vision to this man. So I'd assume that's Christ, God, whatever, telling the angel Gabriel, tell him what this vision has to do with. And as he came near to where I stood, I was terrified and fell face down. Son of man, he said to me, understand that the vision concerns the time of the end. So my question is, if this vision is concerning the time of the end, what is your persuasion on what the time of the end is?
It's a great question. It's an excellent question. In light of my position on dual and triple prophecy fulfillments, the time of the end, and I think this slide really helps with people. Notice you've got your appetizer, your end game. Antiochus Epiphanes sets up the transgression of desolation. End times Antichrist, same thing. But in order to justify these, because sometimes I do believe the dispensationalists go overboard with dual and triple prophecy fulfillments, as long as we have an analog, we're good. And so I believe our analogs to Daniel 8, to Daniel 11, to Daniel 9 are verses found in Luke 21, Mark 13, 2 Thessalonians 2, Revelation 6, Revelation 13, Matthew 24. I think we got a lot of analogs to justify this, is my point. And so the time of the end. Yeah, because we're looking at Antiochus Epiphanes in terms of the minor scale fulfillment, in terms of the appetizer. But again, it is ultimately the prince of darkness. It's the dragon, it's the serpent that's influencing this man. And that's why these wicked men do the same things, because they're doing it through the influence of the dragon. And so the end times Antichrist, who I think is described in Daniel 7, I believe you'd probably say that's Rome, but that's your grand scale fulfillment. So basically what we're looking at in Daniel 8 and especially Daniel 11 are minor scale fulfillments in the immediate sense, but it's also describing a greater fulfillment for the end, because Antiochus Epiphanes is just a shadow of the future Antichrist. And what the Prince of Darkness is doing behind the scenes in 2nd century BC, he's also going to be working behind the scenes in the future. And we read about that specifically in Revelation 13, where it talks about how the dragon gives power unto the beast. So yeah, I do believe that it's accurate to say the end, even if we have a fulfillment with Antiochus Epiphanes, but that's not it. There's still going to be a fulfillment. See, remember, the world has to work in cycles throughout history, because the world has to reach a point where it is prepared for the fulfilling of these prophecies. Like in 2nd century BC, they didn't have technology that would allow for what technology allows for today, like with the mark of the beast, or this one world government, or a man ruling over the entire planet. You know, people did not spread out into all parts of the globe. They didn't seize dominion over the planet at this point. So yeah, speak to this. I do believe that it is referring to the end, even though it is describing events with Antiochus Epiphanes. It's also describing events with the future Antichrist, which is the literal end. Go ahead, Professor Predators.
What do you think the time of the end is? Like, what is the end?
I'm just bringing the other people in here.
Oh yeah, sorry.
So I believe the time of the end in this context is most likely describing what the 70 weeks will accomplish, which is basically that time, that last 7-year period where you have this beast system. So you got the one world government, one world religion, one world currency, one world leader. Then you have God's wrath after we're raptured. I would argue that the so-called times of the Gentiles happens when Antichrist continues in power for 42 months. I think that 42 months will be the times of the Gentiles, because that's when his armies basically come in, take over Jerusalem, and I believe he rules from there. Once that culminates with Jesus Christ coming on a white horse to battle the Antichrist, to battle the false prophet, to throw the dragon into the bottomless pit and initiate the millennial reign, I think that's basically the transition from the end to the everlasting kingdom.
Okay. And
does that help?
Okay. Yeah, I got you. So in Daniel 11, because you said like this is about end times Antichrist as well, we do see in verse 35, it says, some of the wise will fall so that they may be refined, purified, and made spotless until the time of the end, for it will still come at the appointed time. So you would agree that that's talking about the end of, I guess like the most easiest way to say it would be the end of all creation. Is that what the time of the end is? The end of the world, essentially?
What's the exact verse, my man? I'll pull it up.
35, verse 35.
35 of Daniel 12?
No, 11. Sorry, 11. Yeah. Which we could talk about Daniel 12 too, maybe some other.
Yeah. So I do believe Daniel 11 has an interpretation in 2nd century BC with Antiochus Epiphanes, right? You got all these different kings, king of the south, king of the north, everything taking place basically to bring in Antiochus Epiphanes, which we start to read about in verse 21. And in his estate shall stand up a vile person, prince of darkness, working through this person. He shall work deceitfully, makes a league. So everything described here has an interpretation in 2nd century BC, but it also has an application for the end, the final 7-year period.
Right. Daniel 9:27. Right. Is what
yes, because notice, and after the league, a synonym for league is covenant. He shall work deceitfully. And it talks about how he takes away the daily sacrifice. Right here. An arm shall stand in his part, and they, third person plural pronoun now, his people, Antiochus Epiphanes, shall pollute the sanctuary of strength. And so, yeah, this has an interpretation in 2nd century BC, but it also has an application in the future, the far future, because the same things that this vile person is doing, your future vile person, the Antichrist, he's going to do the same things. He's going to make a league. He's going to take away the daily sacrifice. He's going to set up the abomination of desolation. And so it can say the end as long as we understand that there's an interpretation for that time, but also an application or a dual prophecy for the end, because ultimately, as I've been saying all night, it's the dragon, it's the prince of darkness that is working through these vile people, and he is going to continue working through these vile leaders until the end, when he's actually thrown into the bottomless pit and then eventually defeated for good. Go ahead.
Okay. I have two more questions and then we can pass it over to somebody else.
Sure.
In Daniel 11, verse 36, so the following verse 35 says, "Then the king will do as he pleases and will exalt and magnify himself above every god. Then he will speak monstrous things against the God of gods." You would agree, we could stop right there, I guess. You'd say you'd agree that that's an end times Antichrist figure, and there was a partial fulfillment of that in Antiochus Epiphanes, right?
Yeah, I think there was a shadow. Now, with a lot of these passages, we got to understand there's an interpretation and an application. It gets a little more tricky when it comes to these prophetic statements here in Daniel.
Mhm.
But yes, I would argue there's an interpretation in 2nd century BC, because a lot of this is confirmed. If you just study the history of Antiochus Epiphanes and these mini battles and wars that were going on, it fits nicely. But the key is the analog. And so notice, and the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalteth himself and magnify himself above every god. Well, how do we know there's a dual prophecy here? How do we know there's an application for the end? Well, because we have an analog in the New Testament. If we didn't have an analog in the New Testament, then yes, I think there'd be an issue. But we have an analog in 2 Thessalonians 2 where that exact same wording is used to describe somebody other than Antiochus Epiphanes. So we know there's somebody coming in the future that's not Antiochus Epiphanes, but he's doing all of the same things that Antiochus Epiphanes did, and he's doing it through the dragon, which is why he's claiming to be God, because the dragon wants to be God. He's jealous of God, right? And so there's an interpretation in 2nd century BC, but there's also an end times application. How do I know that? Because we have several analogs in the New Testament.
Okay, and then so if we take the other part of this verse, he will be successful until the time of wrath is completed, for what has been decreed must be accomplished. Would you
Right.
agree that the time of wrath is the time of the end?
The time of God's wrath will see, we have God's wrath. For example, in Matthew 24, it talks about there's wrath upon this people. Speaking of the Jewish nation, Israel, right? Because they rejected Messiah.
Yeah.
But there was a period of judgment on Israel in 70 AD. But Revelation describes another period of judgment in the end times on Israel before the rapture. Once we're raptured, then we have God's wrath upon the whole world, not just Israel, but the whole world, the unbelieving world. That's where we see the trumpet, the vile judgments. This would be the period of Christ's second coming. And so basically the end of that age will be the tribulation and our rapture, our catching up. And then we transition into that period of Christ's second coming, which starts with the rapture and ends with the millennial reign. And then we go into the everlasting kingdom. Go ahead.
Gotcha. So just for clarification's sake, though, you agree that the time of wrath is the time of the end?
Well, it'll be the end of that.
Preterist, hold on, Donny. I think, Donny, correct me if I'm wrong, but you consider that there's two wraths: the wrath of Satan, and then halfway after that wrath of Satan, then the rapture, and then the wrath of God. So there's two wraths in your position, right?
Well, there's even two wraths of God, because as the devil is pouring out his wrath upon believers during the tribulation, God, starting at the great tribulation, it says there's wrath upon this people, third person plural pronoun, referring to, and I can pull up the slide here, referring to Israel, because of their rejection of Messiah, because of their acceptance of the Antichrist. Notice this. And this matches up with Zechariah 14, where it says, "For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle." Because remember, in 70 AD, they rejected Messiah. In the end, they accept the Antichrist and help him get into power. And so they're judged both times. There's a local fulfillment in 70 AD, but then there's going to be a greater fulfillment in the end times for accepting the Antichrist, helping him to get into power. This time it's going to have global ramifications rather than just local ramifications, because to anybody outside of that part of the world during the Jewish-Roman War is basically a big nothing burger. It wasn't really affecting anybody, but in the end, it's going to affect the entire planet. There's going to be global ramifications, I would argue, at this point.
Okay.
And so the end of this age, you could say, ends with the rapture. During the Great Tribulation, the Bible says those days are shortened, but for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened, or else no flesh would be saved. Jesus Christ comes in the clouds, gathers together his elect, and then we go into another phase of reality, which is the second coming, which comprises the rapture, 3.5 years of God's wrath with the trumpet and vial judgments, the battle of Armageddon, and then we move into the millennial reign. So there is the end of something at the rapture, Professor Preterist, and the start of something new. I would argue that something new is Christ's second coming, which is a series of interconnected, sophisticated events, just like his first coming. It's not like his first coming was, boom, born in Bethlehem, it's over. No, his first coming was a series of connected events. It was his ministry.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. So I think you understand what I'm saying. Go ahead.
No, I get you. So my final question then is in Luke 21, verse 22, Christ says, "For these be the days of vengeance to fulfill all that is written." That word for fulfill is plero, which means like to bring to full measure. So when you're talking about partial fulfillments, the way I look at it is kind of like my water bottle here, right? It can get filled up halfway, but it only has so much that it can get filled up until it can't get filled up no more. Water starts pouring out of it, and it doesn't make it any more full just because more stuff is going into it. So my question is, what do you think about Christ saying that it fulfills all that which is written?
Well, I think rather than understanding it as a partial fulfillment, understanding it, because I've got the verse up on the screen there, but if we go back to, I gave a whole presentation on this, Ecclesiastes, the thing that hath been, so 70 AD, we had local judgment, 7-year war. It is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done. So I think you'd have to be living under a rock, and I think you'd agree with me with this. You just would say it's not Bible prophecy. The world is, ever since 1948, the world is shaping for the events that happened in 70 AD to happen again, but this time with global ramifications, because we've got that state of Israel there in the Middle East. We have a future temple being built. There's going to be a one world leader who's basically going to step foot in that temple, claim to be God. And a lot of the same events that happened in 70 AD that were locally fulfilled, they're going to happen again in the end, because the world is shaping and shifting towards those same events happening again. His armies are going to come in. They're going to wipe out the people of Jerusalem. They're going to be scattered. He's going to rule and reign from Jerusalem because it's the dragon. That's where he wants to rule. He wants to rule from Jerusalem. He wants to rule from, the Temple of Solomon. He wants to claim to be God. He wants people to worship him as God. But this is going to be the end game. This is going to be the final cycle. The world works in cycles, and this is going to be the final cycle. It's going to be the devil's end game. It's going to be his wrath against the believing world. And so, Luke 21 is both describing 70 AD, but also the future, since that which happened in 70 AD is also going to happen again. And so for all these things to be fulfilled, those cycles need to take place. Those prophetic cycles, the fact that the history works in cycles, they need to come to an official end. And they will Pretty soon, probably. It's coming to a city near you. Is my point. Go ahead.
Okay. I'll get tickets. Just in regards to when you quote Ecclesiastes, I do want to say this. I believe Solomon is asking a, what kind of question is that? When it's like not an actual question, it's like a
Rhetorical question.
Rhetorical.
Thank you. Yeah, because in Isaiah 43:19, God Himself says, "Behold, I will do a new thing." So Solomon's like, "Well, there's nothing. Who can say there's something new?" Well,
Nothing
God
new
does.
under the sun, right?
Yeah, but God says, "No, I'm gonna do a new thing." And I obviously, my purview is that this new thing was the coming in of the new covenantal system of worship, because it's something that had never happened before and is never going to happen again. So that was the new thing, right? You have the resurrection of the dead, of the just and the unjust, the judgment, the coming in of the new covenant. Obviously, we know it's an everlasting covenant, is one that never ends. So that would be the new thing. And of course, that's just my purview on it. But anyway,
if I could, I want to ask you this question. Well,
Yeah.
firstly, let me say, I don't know if you've taken any, basic history classes or courses or anything, or read any history textbooks. Even the secular world, they will point out, there's a lot written on it, that history repeats itself. Men fall into the same mistakes. Wicked men try and rule in much the same way. We never learn our lessons. The history works in cycles, and they don't really know why, but we know why, because God works in cycles. History works in cycles because the world is going to continue working in this pattern until the end, until the millennial reign, and then until the new heaven and new earth. But I wanted to point, these are really good questions. I appreciate you asking them, but I did want to go back as we start to wind things down, and other people feel free to jump in, but I did want to keep this to 2 hours. I can't remember if you answered this question, or maybe I missed it. How do you see, so I think this is a sticking point, even with preterists, if they want to say that this was all fulfilled in the past, there's nothing new there's nothing to see here, folks, nothing for the future. How do you get around the fact that the 7-year Jewish-Roman War?
Oh, okay, right.
Right. So how do you see that? Is it just a coincidence that it was 7 years, right in the middle of the war, the sacrifices stopped, the city was made desolate? Do you not see any of that in here? Is it just kind of an outside thing that's kind of cute that happened? Go ahead. How do you see that?
No, yeah. So I mean, obviously, if it's a 7-year war, it is pretty coincidental, right? But when I look at scripture, even if it was a 7-year war, God was only concerned with the first 3.5 years of it. Because there's only a times and half a time. There's only 3.5 years. Revelation is only ever about 3.5 years, 42 months, 1,260 days, and there's no.
I would argue. Let me just say this. I would argue that's because it's describing periods of time. So basically, you have this 7-year period, right? Pretend you have the Lord of the Rings trilogy. You got these 3 movies. My wife and I are rewatching them, and it's great. So you got these 3 movies. Would you agree that it's great, Professing Preterist, Lord of the Rings?
I've never seen it. I'm sorry.
You're missing out. You're living in the new heaven and new earth, and you're not up on Tolkien. I can't believe
not up on. I'm sorry. There's a lot of movies I haven't seen. I haven't seen Star Wars. I never seen The Goonies. Don't hate me.
That's okay. Star Wars, I'm not a big fan of. Lord of the Rings, though, there's a lot of Christian imagery and themes in there. That's why I like it. So, anyways, within this trilogy, you can find descriptions of events within the trilogy. Like the second part is the 2 towers. So you can find descriptions about the 2 towers, but it doesn't mean that the other 2 movies don't exist, part 1 and 3. So what Revelation is doing is it's describing this 7-year period, but what's happening in that 7-year period? Well, Antichrist continues in power for 42 months. That's 3.5 years. He's continuing in power. So he's continuing from something. Well, what are the seals? Antichrist goes to conquer, world at war, famine, starvation, death in 1/4 of the earth. 5th seal, martyrs appear in heaven. That's when the Great Tribulation starts. So we have 3.5 years of him rising to power. And then now we have 42 months where he's in power. 1,260 days is mentioned. 1,290 days is mentioned. And so, we have a 7-year period, and God's giving us descriptions of aspects of that 7-year period. And even if you disagree with me, does that make sense, Professing Predators?
Yeah. I get where you come from with that. My rebuttal to it would be that it's Revelation is 3.5 years. It's recapitulated 3 different times. That's just my
You
rebuttal.
see it
to
as a recapitulation?
Yeah, there's
Okay.
only a 3.5 year period, and so like I said, it is definitely coincidental, like oddly coincidental that it was a 7-year war, but I don't think that the
Okay,
latter
you
half
do
of
see
that
this as a
war-
coincidence then.
Yeah, like because I don't think God's ultimate plan had nothing to do with that that other 3.5 years. It only had to do with the first 3.5 years leading to the destruction of Jerusalem. Yeah.
Okay, let me ask you this. How did the 70 years of Babylonian captivity end?
With Israel coming back into the land, pretty much getting out of their exodus.
Right.
In the land.
And so according to you, how does the 70 weeks end?
With the destruction of the temple and Israel coming out of their final exodus to the inheritance.
So the 70 years of Babylonian captivity ends with them coming back to the land, a happy ending. But the 70 weeks, you're saying it ends with them being scattered.
Well, yeah. So the bloodline Israelites, right? Like, so that's your contrast between old covenantal, system of worship and new covenantal system of worship. The bloodline Israelites have had nothing to do with God's penultimate plan after AD 70. They were used as a form of obedience and a type to point to God's majesty, right? Like if we didn't have an Israel, we wouldn't have an Old Testament, we wouldn't have anything to point to God. So but they were absolutely used. Everything in the Old Testament, I believe, points to Christ. Every single thing, every word, everything points to Christ. And part of the Old Testamental system of worship was Israel. Their temple was destroyed. They were brought out of the land. They were brought back in. So we look at the inverse of that, where the temple was destroyed, and in a physical sense, Israel was scattered, right? Because that's part of Deuteronomy 28. That was what was told, and 29 technically. That's what was said was going to happen to them. But the spiritual fulfillment of that was, you see in Matthew 24, 1 Thessalonians 4, Isaiah 27, where spiritually they were brought in to Christ, right? That's in Revelation, the 144,000. They are called forth, and they get their inheritance. This is what the ultimate thing is. That's why in Hebrews 11, Paul starts expounding upon the inheritance and what the promise was. It wasn't this promise of them actually getting this physical piece of land that was fulfilled. Joshua says, "Hey, this was fulfilled," right? Like
I agree with all that. I agree with you on that.
Yeah.
But see, my point is before I make the point, and then we'll wrap it up. I'll do these more frequently earlier so people can join. This is a point I've been making throughout. I've got a slide here that connects that I want the audience to see. Daniel 8, I believe this is Antiochus Epiphanes. Notice how it says, "And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power." And then Revelation 13:4 says, "And they worship the dragon, which gave power unto the beast." So I think all of this, these wicked men, these vile people that are doing these things, I think it's ultimately through the dragon. It's the prince of darkness, not the prince of peace. And then to respond to what you're saying, in the same way that the Babylonian captivity ended with the Israelites coming back to the land because they're in belief again. God doesn't bring the Israelites back into the land unless they've repented, unless they're following the true God again. And so they can be blessed again. I believe this is only a shadow fulfillment, Daniel 9, because if this was the ultimate fulfillment, the 7-year Jewish-Roman War, the Israelites are scattered. But I think the ultimate fulfillment is the millennium because, as you were saying, and I appreciate it, the 70 weeks will accomplish these things. I think these will be accomplished where Jesus is literally anointed, prophet, priest, king, literally, not just anointed at his baptism with the Holy Spirit. The everlasting kingdom, making an end to sins, literally, where we in glorified states won't sin. This will be at the millennial reign when all of what? Spiritual Israel shall be saved. So in the same way, the Israelites came back to the land at the end of the 7-year Babylonian captivity, the Bible describes a time where all Israel shall be saved. I take that as being, well, spiritual Israel comprises what? All believers of all time. And so who is going to rule and reign with Christ during the millennial reign? It's all believers of all time. They're resurrected to rule and reign with him in a glorified state. That includes Old Testament saints, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, anybody who was saved, who was an Israelite, that's a believer and therefore part of spiritual Israel. Then all Israel shall be saved, as in we are all believers of all time. We will inherit the land. All of those who have believed in Christ, all of those who have been saved for the millennial reign. And so do you see that two-part picture of restoration? 70 years Babylonian captivity, Israelites come back because they believed again. 70 weeks end with what? All believers of all time inheriting the kingdom with Jesus Christ. Those that have died in the past, they're coming back. They're being regathered to rule and reign with Jesus. And so I see this as a beautiful two-part picture of restoration. For the end, though, it's spiritual Israel. Anyways,
okay.
Speak to that.
If I could just
go ahead.
give I just want to say,
Predators. Sorry, right before you get started,
yeah,
Donny, I know I saw apologetics and a couple other people hop in, and kind of you and Predator has been going back and forth.
Yeah, okay, yeah, no, I'll bow out. I'm sorry.
No, I want to hear what you had to say, but I feel like Donnie's wrapping it up, and I also want to hear what these other guys have to say before he does.
Yeah, let's do this, guys. Since we do have 10 more minutes, I wanted to wrap it up at the 2-hour mark. We got Brian here. We've got, Josh, you've been here. Jesus Christ, Gnosis. Professing Predator, it's been a great discussion. We'll have to set up another one. Gentlemen, what are your thoughts on what's been saying? What's your positions? Take a few minutes before we wrap it up and go ahead.
I just have a couple questions. Is it okay? Can y'all hear me okay?
You're coming in clear.
You sound good, brother.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Donnie, I have some questions. I just want to ask some questions on y'all been talking about Daniel chapter 9. I've kind of missed most of it because I've been going in and out of sleep. I've only had a couple hours of sleep. So if I'm understanding everything correctly, you believe the person mentioned in chapter 9 on the he is antagonist. How do you pronounce his name?
Antiochus Epiphanes.
Yeah. On the reference that uses the word Messiah, because there's a couple places like where the Messiah be cut off and things like that.
Oh,
do you believe
I should clarify, Brian. No, I don't see Daniel 9:27 as being Antiochus Epiphanes. I see that as being, in terms of the immediate fulfillment in 70 AD, I see that as being Titus, but also the Antichrist in the future. Because ultimately it's the prince of darkness. It's the dragon that's working through people like Antiochus Epiphanes, like Titus, like the Antichrist. So one could say he is the prince of darkness, Satan, but for each point in history, he's influencing and giving power to a different person. So I think it's both Titus and the future Antichrist. Does that make sense, brother?
Would you say that your view on that would be the traditional premillennial view, like say that these are kind of allusions to what the Antichrist is going to be doing? Is that what you're saying?
Right. It's a futurist pre-mill view. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. But the references about the being cut off and things like that, where it talks about the Messiah previously, you do think that's talking about Jesus, right?
Right. I believe
the Messiah.
Yeah. But yeah. Where it says after 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. I believe that is a prophecy of the substitutionary atonement, Jesus Christ. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. All Well, that's all my questions. I just wanted to ask those questions.
That's good.
Buddy, just to make sure I understood that. All right,
Yeah.
I'm gonna go after this.
What
All
about
right,
you?
thanks, Don. Appreciate it. Huh?
Hey, Brian, what about you, brother? Do you take the premill view of that, or how do you view?
Yeah. I'm a premillennialist.
Okay.
My view is slightly different from yours because I'm not a what they call a tribulationist. I'm a pre-tribulationist, but it's slightly different.
Let's
from you, but
go.
it's premillennial. Huh?
Pre-trib, premill is what you are.
Yeah. But I'm a premillennialist, so yeah. I agree with you on chapter 9 of Daniel.
Very good, Brian. Before you
Awesome.
leave, brother, what do you have in store for us for the ministry coming up?
Well, I have a video that I'm working on concerning the Tompkins controversy of self-to-self analysis. I made a major discovery of what going on. I know where what mistake was made and so forth. So and that's gonna be interesting. I also kind of want to do a response to Erica. Erica just recently did a response to a comment that I made. I don't know if you saw it, Donnie.
Oh yeah, I still got to watch her video, but I saw the portion where she was responding to you.
Yeah. So I wanted to set to do a response. That won't be part of the Tompkins controversy or nothing, but it's just a individual response video that I want to do on that because she made a lot of mistakes on that. She kept assuming her position, and so it's just But anyway, I want to respond to that.
She gives us. I like to say Erica gives us good job security.
Yeah. She didn't respond in the comment section when I first put the thing up. You think she would just reply in the comments, but I guess it's just easier to make her to make videos so that way we don't go to a back and forth. But anyway, that's something that I want to respond to her on that. I'm still watching her video. I haven't watched all of it. But on the Tompkins controversy, that's going to be in the next video that's coming up.
Very cool.
And that's pretty cool. I know exactly what happened. I know why Erica got less than 100% and so forth. So it's some cool stuff coming up.
Very good, brother. You keep up the excellent work. I encourage people to go over, subscribe to your channel, and it's always a pleasure to have you for our open mics, Brian.
Thanks. I wasn't going to come in at first because I usually don't discuss eschatology as much, but I had some questions I wanted to ask.
Very good. You're always welcome to join Brian. There'll be plenty more in the world of eschatology. I'm looking at the chat. Jamie Russell, we've been at it for 2 hours. Not sure where you were. So anybody who has a preterist view of Daniel 9, the room was open for 2 hours to come in and challenge what I was saying. Chris Lucas, I see you there as well. I'll try and do another one of these soon. I still haven't seen, and well, I should say I appreciate Professing Preterist joining because he was always ready for some impromptu debate, right? Professing Predator. So that was fun. You asked some good questions. Yeah. It was an excellent back and forth. And until we do this again, anybody who disagrees with me on this issue, feel free to join these open mics, address my challenges, engage my eschatological position, and give me some justification using history, grammar, and context for how the he of Daniel 9:27 can be Messiah. Professing Predators, you're a full predator, so you have a different approach than the amillennialists and the even premillennialists that would hold to a no future 70th week of Daniel. So yeah. Anyways, I think we're going to start wrapping up. Jesus Christ, Gnosis, good to have you. Is there anything you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just was going to ask one thing. Hey, this is the first time I've ever tuned into your show. I actually got recommended your channel from a friend who is big into the young Earth
Very
kind of
cool.
stuff. But I just had one question. What does for you anyway? Again, I joined halfway through, so I didn't get to catch a lot of it. But
No worries.
what weight does the teachings of the early church, let's say the first 7 ecumenical councils and their interpretations of Revelation, especially, given that, Revelation isn't, read liturgically in the Eastern Orthodox tradition. So I guess what weight, because you were talking about grammar and history, what weight does the writings of the early church fathers, the early church bishops, play into your interpretation?
It's a good question. I think it's interesting to see what the early church believed, but I wouldn't treat them as authoritative in
Hmm.
the sense that, I mean, the early church believed, as far as I know, in a lot of them believed in faith plus works for salvation. They believed in infant baptism, baptismal regeneration. So they believed in a lot of heresies, is what I would say. And so I don't give a lot of credence to what they have to say. It does sound like they were primarily right on eschatology, though. They were historical premillennialists. As far as I know, they believed we would be here for the Antichrist. So they were post-trib.
Yep.
So, they were not dispensational Zionists like many Christians are today.
Definitely not. Definitely
Right.
not.
So I do believe that they were right in a lot of their eschatology, but also wrong in a lot of their soteriology. But I still think it's interesting to see what, that they definitely weren't amill. They weren't post-mill. They were mostly pre-mill, historical pre-mill, from my understanding. But I'm not an expert at the
They
church
also they also have a different. So I guess some of these terms that, because I'm not Protestant, so some of these terms that you're using, we consider millennialism as it's chiliasm, which is the Greek term for thousand, and that, well, there's some debate as to whether or not that was condemned at the Second Ecumenical Council or at Ephesus, but that's neither here nor there. But anyway, I know you're wrapping up, but hey, anytime you have a let's say Protestant versus Eastern Orthodox,
Sure.
I'd be interested, because some of the things you just said are heresies. I would like to push back on, and I'm sure you would, from the Protestant point of view, push back as well. But anyway, I just enjoyed the stream, and it's cool to see what other traditions kind of are saying about these topics. I mean, you have the testimony of Jesus Christ, so that's
Right.
good to see.
Yeah,
Anyway, enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, I've got a lot of Eastern Orthodox friends, people I discuss that topic with. So for sure, we do a lot of open mics on creation evolution, but I also do a lot of open mics on soteriology. So for sure, I would love for you. Actually, our last soteriology open mic was a couple weeks ago, and we went for about 6 hours. A lot of fun, and we had 2 Eastern Orthodox Christians in here. So yeah, I'd love for you to join in the future. So
soteriologically, we're going to be very different, as you well know. But just one thing. So since you're in the evolution kind of sphere, I don't know if you've heard of Father Seraphim Rose.
Father,
he is yeah. I mean, you might not call him Father, but Seraphim Rose was a monk in the Eastern Orthodox tradition. He wrote a book called Genesis, Creation, and Early Man, which argued primarily for a young Earth, literal, creation, literal interpretation of Genesis, but largely, pulling from early church fathers. But it's a really good book. You might add it to your arsenal, just in terms of some of the arguments made and some of the reaching back into history, even if you don't consider the church fathers authoritative. There's definitely some interesting tidbits that I'm sure you could glean from it.
Hey,
that's interesting.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, go ahead, man.
Go ahead. Oh, yeah, I was going to ask you, are you a Roman Catholic?
No.
Eastern Orthodox.
Eastern Orthodox.
Eastern Orthodox? Okay.
Yeah, I'm a member of the church that Jesus founded in 33 AD. Just kidding, guys. You know.
Yeah, I know.
I'm just joking around. All right.
Those are fighting words. How dare you?
Yeah, I know.
Remark.
This is all jovial. You know, we're good.
You know, when I engage Catholics or Eastern Orthodox proponents like yourself, I do like to point out, I like to say this phrase, my church father can beat up your church father. And it's a little tongue in cheek, but you do find a lot of, I mean, I could get early Martin Luther and late Martin Luther, and he's going to contradict, like he's going to be against himself. Right. And I noticed that with a lot of the early church, and we could have a whole 3-hour discussion on that, but I do find, you know, I could take this church father and use him against you, and you could have your church father and pit them against each other and, you know, see who's stronger and quicker. And
we call that quote mining. You'll see it, you know, I'll see it used by, you know, folks on my side. I see it used by folks in the Protestant world.
Right.
But yeah, it's called quote mining. You'll find some random quote from Irenaeus that thinks it proves this point of view. You'll find another quote from Athanasius that says this, and you know,
right.
That's why we take like a holistic approach. It's called phronema, which is kind of like a mindset. So it's a way of changing your mind and orienting your thinking kind of more eastward rather than you know, Western scholastic. You know how the Roman Catholics split off from us. Well, as we would say, Catholics would say we split off from them, but you know, more friendly debates.
Is that called the Great Schism or the Great Schism? How do you call that? The Great Schism.
Yeah. Whatever, 1054, I think, 1050 something.
Yeah.
But hey, man, we all love Jesus, so
amen.
All good.
Amen.
But hey, I enjoyed the stream, man. I enjoyed the stream. Keep up the cool, you know, fighting the evolutionist work. I enjoy that aspect of your content a lot.
Well, I appreciate it. You're always welcome in these open mics. This has been a lot of fun. To the audience, thank you so much for tuning in. I will be implementing more of these, hopefully. We've been doing a lot on Daniel. I just did an impromptu debate on Daniel the other night, so people check that out. That's kind of why I did this. And I'll try and do another Daniel 9 and especially a soteriology open mic sometime in the next week or two. We do them frequently. Sometimes they're impromptu. I'm really, like, for example, I was busy all day. I got home and I knew I had a couple hours to spare before I got to do some other things. And I thought, okay, let's do an open mic. So there are a lot of impromptu open mics too, but also a lot of scheduled ones days in advance. And so just make sure that you're subscribed, hit that notification bell, and that way you'll get notified every time we go live for an open mic, whether it's on creation, evolution, eschatology, soteriology. And so, okay, with that, I appreciate everybody who joined. It's been a lot of fun. Josh, my brother, did you have any final words?
Yeah, just very quickly. Somebody in the comments did ask if there was any way that they could get access to your slides. I'm not sure if you that's something that you're open to as of now, but that did come up in case you want to address it at a later time or whenever.
Yeah, Josh, I appreciate that. I have sent my slides out to many people who ask for them. I am always adding to my slides all the time. You know, I've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of slides. And so anytime I learn something new, anytime I can, I'm adding to them. So if you do want the current slides, send me an email. I can send you them. You know, that's not to say in a month, there's not going to be an additional 50, 60 slides added to that. But for sure, yeah, shoot me an email if you're interested in my slides on eschatology, soteriology, whatever it is. I'm happy to send you those.
Cool. And one last thing here is I am going to be doing a Daniel debate on Praises channel. So I'll send you that info in case you wanted to share that.
Yes.
That's going to be on the 22nd of this month.
Very
Other than
good.
that, great job
Now,
today, everyone. Preterist. Go ahead.
The guy you're debating, Chris Lucas, I debated him on the same topic. So make sure to watch that, brother.
Yeah, I've been doing my studying and my research, so I'll be ready at least to give a good presentation at least.
You make us futurists proud, brother.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. We're going to wrap it up here. It was a lot of fun. Next time, I want to see the other partial preterists on this issue join, like Jamie, Chris. Let me see here. Contemplate, Matt G. Good to see you in the chat. I know you have a differing view too. So yeah, the more the better. And Professing Preterist, good job to you. I always appreciate you having the guts and the confidence to enter the debate dojo. You're never you never shy away from a good discussion. So okay, we're gonna wrap it up. Great show. I had a lot of fun. And all right, we'll see everybody soon. God bless.